Hello, in this video I will analyze Act 3, Scene 4 of William Shakespeare's play Macbeth. And in this scene, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth throw a feast for their loyal lords to celebrate Macbeth and his new position as king. And it's here the consequences of Macbeth's murder on King Duncan also start to show. So, in my analysis, I will therefore mainly be focusing on the characterization of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth and their relationship and how it has developed. But I will also be commenting on the language, the symbolism, and the themes. And on my screen here, you can see my outline and how I have chosen to structure the presentation. So, in this scene, Macbeth actually presents himself as a generous host, telling the guests not to stand up but to seat themselves. And he says, ourself would mingle with society and play the humble host, meaning that he will sit with them rather than elevating himself by sitting apart on the throne. And given the sense of all of this, it is worth noting that both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth use the word welcome 3 times in the first 8 lines of the scene. So they're both really trying to ensure that they're getting the lords on side because they know they have a battle to face in terms of suspicion. And it's therefore clear to see how both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth tries to come off as gracious in this scene. So, Macbeth. When Macbeth first sees the ghost of Banquo, his first response is, "Which of you have done this?" And it is by that clear to see how Macbeth's suspicious nature is evident in his immediate belief that one of the lords is playing a trick on him. And also the horror of the ghost's appearance is clear in the adjective gory. Macbeth says, "The gory looks at me." And this also fits with the description of Banquo's violent death, which Macbeth just has heard from the murderer. The murderer says, "Safe in a ditch he bides, with 20 trenched gashes on his head." So in terms of this, you could say that the guilt finally catches up on Macbeth due to the news of Banquo. And that is also why he's haunted by the ghost of Banquo. Because in reality, he's haunted by the guilt of killing him. And that's also why Banquo's ghost appear in the same sort of description as the murderer described to Macbeth. So after the feast, Macbeth actually leaves his sense of morality behind to become a cruel tyrant. And he remarks this, "Blood will have blood." And this is when Macbeth maybe finally realizes how one murder will lead to another. And he also says, "I'm in blood, stepped in so far that should I wait no more. Returning were as tedious as go over." And this is actually a metaphor, and it illustrates the fact that there is no turning back. Macbeth has already gone too far, and it really shows the climax of Macbeth, because the fact that he has already killed his king and his loyal friend, he might as well just continue killing to stay in power. And it stands very much in contrast to Act 1, Scene 7, where he thought a lot about killing King Duncan. But he now needs to act and not reflect as he did in Act 1, Scene 7. In terms of Macbeth's lack of control when he sees the ghost of Banquo, Lady Macbeth attempts to take control over the situation by blaming Macbeth's outburst on a mental illness. And she then afterwards addresses directly to Macbeth by questioning his manhood. She says, "Are you a man?" And this method of questioning Macbeth's manhood is actually also used in Act 1, Scene 7, where Lady Macbeth tries to convince Macbeth to kill King Duncan. And Lady Macbeth then further says, "Impostors to true fear would well become a woman's story at a winter's fire, authorized by her grandam. Shame itself, why do you make such faces? When all's done, you look but on a stool." So here Lady Macbeth actually mock Macbeth's bravery, claiming that his fears are as pathetic as those found in a woman's story. And once again, these tools are employed by Lady Macbeth to convince Macbeth to kill, but they're no longer working as they did in Act 1, Scene 7. It can therefore be said that there has been this shift in their relationship and in their roles. And in this way, Macbeth then tries to justify his fear to Lady Macbeth by saying, "What man I dare?" Because Macbeth claims that no enemy would make him afraid, but this unreal form of Banquo cannot be fought. And this is actually an echo of Act 1, Scene 7, where Macbeth says, "I dare do all that may become a man." And this is Macbeth's way of reassuring his own bravery to Lady Macbeth. When it comes to the relationship between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, the fact that the guests are told to leave is an embarrassing moment for the two of them, and it also marks a turning point for the worst in their position of power. But you could also say that it is a turning point for their relationship, because until now they have been close and plotted the murder of King Duncan together, and Lady Macbeth has also been the driving force of this plan. But it's worth noting that after the lords have left, Lady Macbeth is strangely quiet, and that does not really match up with the energy we saw from her during the presence of the ghost. Because after the guests have gone, mostly all the lines are spoken by Macbeth. And this could perhaps be a symbol of Lady Macbeth being shocked to see the effect of Duncan's murder on her husband, and perhaps it could even be a symbol of Lady Macbeth starting to feel feeling guilty about the killing of Duncan. So, language. When talking to one of the returning murderers, an antithetical parallelism is used to joke that Banquo's blood is better on the murderer's face than in Banquo's body. Macbeth says, this better thee without than he within." And this sort of wordplay suggests the pleasure that Macbeth receives upon hearing the news. Also, upon learning that Fleance has escaped, Macbeth then says, "Then comes my fit again. I had else been perfect, whole as the marble, founded as the rock, as broad and general as the case in air, but now I am cabined, cribbed, confined, bound in two saucy doubts and fears." So, whole as the marble, founded as the rock, as broad and general as the casing air. These are similes, and these similes are here used to provide a sense of how secure Macbeth's mental state would have been, and how free he would have felt if both Banquo and Fleance had been killed. And we can relate this to Act 1, Scene 3, where the witches make a prophecy about how Banquo's sons will one day become kings. So therefore, Macbeth feels unsafe in his position right now. And Macbeth is now confined to the knowledge of Fleance's freedom, and here he uses words such as cabined, cribbed, confined, bound in. And you could say that these words create a semantic field of imprisonment, which underlie the state of fear in which Macbeth now finds himself in. And this is also further employed through the harsh alliteration of cabined, cribbed, confined, and bound, which all rhymes with one another. And this leads us to symbolism. When Macbeth talks about Fleance and his escape, he says, "There the grown serpent lies, the worms that fled, hath nature in time will venom breed." So here, Fleance is presented as a young snake or worm that will grow and seek revenge one day for his father's death. And another symbol is used when Macbeth says, "You know your own degree, sit down at first and last." And this is a reference to the chain of being which Elizabethans believed in. And we see how Macbeth in this passage acknowledges the strict hierarchy, but you could also say that it is used as a dramatic irony, because when Macbeth kills King Duncan, he himself disrupts this chain of being, and the world order then turns into chaos for everyone. So it's kind of ironic. And another example of disrupting the chain of being is seen in Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's relationship. Lady Macbeth comes off as a nonconformist woman for her time, and as I said before, she questions Macbeth's manhood several times through the play, and therefore there's this reverse role distribution in their relationship as husband and wife, because Macbeth represents a more submissive role, you could say, whereas Lady Macbeth represents a more dominant role. And this is an example of how the hierarchy in the play is challenged. Also, when Lady Macbeth asks people to leave, she also says, "Stand not upon you, your order of your going, but go at once." And this is actually a contrast to the opening of the scene where it says, "You know your own degree." So, themes. One of the major themes of Macbeth is the whole aspect of masculinity versus femininity. And especially the role of women is interesting in relation to responsibility, because Macbeth is a very ambitious man, but his ambition is mainly encouraged by the witches and especially his wife. And as I already have established, we saw in Act 1, Scene 7, how Lady Macbeth in fact tries to convince his husband to kill King Duncan in the first place. And in this play, Shakespeare seems to therefore portray women as some sort of evil creatures who leads men to temptation. And it seems as temptation therefore also could be another theme in relation to the play of Macbeth. Because throughout the play we see how the desire for power easily can lead people into temptation, and you can see this, for example, in Act 1, Scene 3, where Macbeth truly starts to rely on the witches' prophecy, and it's through their prophecies that he becomes tempted for wanting power. He, for example, says, "Stay, you imperfect speakers, tell me more." So the temptation develops some sort of addiction for wanting more, wanting power, and it is the desire for power, the temptation, that becomes his downfall in the end. Yes. Okay, so a quick sum up. This scene marks the climax of Macbeth's position of power. He might be at his highest power-wise, but morally he is at his lowest, and this is shown by Banquo's ghost, and by the lies both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth start telling their guests to cover up for Macbeth's strange behavior. So from now on, things will only go downhill for him and Lady Macbeth and their relationship. And it's also quite symbolic how Macbeth has tried to put society together but fails because of the deeds he has committed to get there. So yes, that was it. Sorry.